Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ways of the World, a brief global history with sources. Chapter 4, Culture and Religion in Eurasia, North Africa. And today we're going to continue our study with the birth of Christianity with Buddhist comparisons. All right, let's start with the lives of the founders. Siddhartha Gautama was royal. Jesus was from a lower class family, but both became spiritual seekers. Both were essentially mystics. They claimed personal experience of another level of reality, and they based their life's work on their religious experiences. Both were quote-unquote wisdom teachers. They challenged conventional values. They urged the renunciation of wealth. They stressed love or compassion as the basis for morality, and they called for a personal transformation of their followers. But there are some important differences. Jesus had Jewish tradition of a single personal deity. His teachings were more social and political than Gautama's. And Jesus spoke on behalf of the poor, the oppressed, and quote-unquote the impure. He was active for about 3 years. However, Gautama was active for over 40 years. Jesus was executed as a criminal, and Gautama died of old age. The spread of new religions. Probably neither intended to create a new religion, both did. Their followers transformed them both into gods. But let's talk about how Christianity became a world religion. The process began with Paul, circa 667 CE. Women had more opportunities, but early on there was still a heavy patriarchal society of the time. Excuse me. Early converts were typically urban lower class and women. There was a big attraction of miracle stories and that Christians were to care for each other. And Christianity spread to other parts. Paul spread to modern Turkey and Syria. Syria and Persia were the heartlands of the church in the East with their own organization and liturgy. Armenia was the first place where rulers adopted Christianity as a state region. Syrian and Persian missionaries brought Christianity to southern India and Central Asia. By 570 CE, some Arabs had even become Christians. And thus we see the Coptic Church emerge in Egypt. North Africa furnished intellectuals and martyrs. And during the 4th century, Christianity became the state religion in Axum, which is modern Eritrea and Ethiopia. In Axum, Christianity linked to the Coptic Church, but they used the local Ge'ez language. Now, the Romans are known for persecuting Christians as quote-unquote atheists for their antagonism to all divine powers except their one God. However, this ended with conversion of the Emperor Constantine in 380 CE. And later, Roman emperors tried to use Christianity as like the social glue of the empire. Theodosius, who ruled from 370 to 395 CE, ordered the closure of all polytheistic temples, and thus started the process by which the Roman Empire and later all of Europe became overwhelmingly Christian. Now, Buddhism, this was supported by Ashoka. Buddhism was never promoted as India's sole religion, but it was ultimately absorbed into Hinduism in India. In the Roman Empire, there was no renewal of Roman polytheism. Christianity endured quite successfully in Europe, but took some practices from the Roman world. And both Buddhism and Christianity created networks of cultural connections. All right, so let's look at this image of Perpetua. A few Christian martyrs whose stories so inspired the persecuted converts of the early Christian centuries could match that of Perpetua. It's a young woman whose prison diary provides a highly personal account of her arrest and trial. Born in 181 CE in the North African city of Carthage, Perpetua came from an upper-class Roman family, was quite well educated, literate in Latin and probably Greek, unacquainted with Roman philosophical writings, and by the time she entered the historical record, at about the age of 22, she had given birth to a son, but had lost her husband to either death or abandonment, and recently began to study Christianity, becoming part of a small but growing group of educated people who were turning toward the new faith. Now, coinciding with her conversion was a wave of persecutions ordered by the Roman Emperor Septimus Severus, also of North African descent, and a devotee of the Egyptian cult of Isis and Osiris. Severus sought to forbid new conversions rather than punish long-established Christians. And in line with this policy, in 203 CE, the hardline governor of the region ordered the arrest of Perpetua and 4 others, 2 slaves. One of them was a woman named Felicitas, who was 8 months pregnant, and 2 free men. Before she was taken to prison, however, Perpetua decisively confirmed her commitment to Christianity by accepting baptism. She was terrified as the prison was crowded and stiflingly hot. There we go. And she was consumed with anxiety for her child. Several fellow Christians managed to bribe prison guards to permit her to nurse her baby son. She was reunited with her child. She found that a prison had suddenly become a palace. And those are her words. A few days later, she was deeply distressed that the non-Christian father arrived for a visit, hoping to persuade his only daughter to recant her faith, save her life, the family's honor. But it was a heartbreaking encounter. Firm in her faith, she refused, and he left shortly afterward. On the day of her trial, with her distraught father in attendance, the governor begged Perpetua to consider her family and renounce her faith by offering a sacrifice to the emperor. Again, she refused, and together with her 4 companions, was quote-unquote condemned to the beasts. A humiliating form of execution normally reserved for the lower classes. Although she was now permanently separated from her child, she wrote, quote-unquote, we returned to the prison in high spirits, and during her last days in the prison, she and the others were treated, quote-unquote, more humanely, and were allowed to visit with family and friends, as the head of the jail himself was a Christian. Then on the birthday of the emperor, the small band of Christians was marched to the amphitheater, and according to eyewitness accounts, they joyfully were going to heaven. After the prisoners strenuously and successfully resisted distressing in the robes of pagan priests, the 3 men were sent into the arena to contend with a boar, a bear, and a leopard. Then it was the turn of the women, Perpetua and the slave Felicitas, who had given birth only 2 days earlier. When a mad cow failed to kill them, a soldier was sent to finish the work, and as he approached, Perpetua apparently, when he approached her, he apparently hesitated, but as an eyewitness account put it, took the trembling hand of the young gladiator and put it to her own throat. And she is thus considered a martyr. All right, let's look at the map here of the spread of early Christianity and Buddhism. In the 5 centuries after the birth of Jesus, Christianity found converts from Spain to Northeast Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia, and India. In the Roman Empire, Axum and Armenia, the new religion, enjoyed state support as well. Subsequently, Christianity took root solidly in Europe and after 1000 CE in Russia. Meanwhile, Buddhism was spreading from its South Asian homeland to various parts of Asia, even as it was weakening in India itself. So from its start on the eastern shore of the Mediterranean Sea, in which direction did Christianity spread farthest? Well, Christianity spread the farthest eastward all the way to China. So if you compare this map with the map 7-1, the Silk Roads, and 7-2, the Sea Roads, and we'll see those in later chapters, You can really look at the regions where Christianity and Buddhism spread along long-distance trade routes. All right, the first Christian emperor, Constantine. Following Constantine's conversion, artists used both Roman, imperial, and Christian symbols to present him as a Christian emperor. In the circa 4th century carving from what is now Croatia, Constantine is portrayed sitting on an imperial throne holding a Christian cross while a man lies prostrate before him. So how does the use of Christian iconography in this image explain how Constantine would use religion to keep the empire intact? Well, by depicting himself as a Christian, Constantine was able to win the support and loyalty of other Christians and announce his policy of religious tolerance, and the lack of which had partially led to political instability and persecutions in previous years. And it would slowly thus begin to eliminate that. It also allowed him to use the increasingly popular religion and its institutions and hierarchy to shore up the weakening imperial state. All right, institutions, controversies, and divisions. Christianity developed a male hierarchical organization. Women were excluded from priesthood. And there was a concern for uniform doctrine and practice amongst all Christian churches. And thus we see the emergence of a bishop of Rome, who is then called the Pope, as the dominant leader in Western Europe. But some major disagreements in doctrinal practices led to the split between Latin, Roman Catholic, and Greek, Eastern Orthodox branches of Christendom. A series of church councils in 325 CE, 451 CE, and 553 CE defined which texts were part of the New Testament and which were abandoned. Buddhism clashed as well over interpretation of the Buddhist teachings. A series of councils did not prevent divisions between Theravada, Mahayana, and other branches of Buddhism. But there's a less sense of right and wrong than with the Christian conflicts. Buddhism did not develop an overall church hierarchy like Christianity did. Okay, the temptation of the Buddha. Here, if you look at this, how are Mara and his daughters shown on the right portrayed in this relief? Mara and his daughters are depicted as happy, relaxed, and dressed in finery. So what attitude characterizes the Buddha shown on the left and surrounded by the attendants? The Buddha, larger than the other individuals depicted here, appears serene, contemplative, maybe even authoritative, and strong enough to resist the charms of Mara's daughters. Now, the elongated earlobes reflect the heavy, luxurious earrings that the Buddha wore earlier in his life before becoming the enlightened one. So why might the artist have included this detail in his depiction of the Buddha? Well, it's possible that these earrings served as a reminder of the Buddha's past and a lesson for worshippers that even the most debauched can find enlightenment by following the Buddha's teachings. And the creator of this statue intended to convey the Buddha's calm and detached posture toward the world. So what features of the statue might illustrate this posture? Calmness is evidenced by the Buddha's upright stance, as well as that welcoming hand gestures that he's offering. So what elements of Buddhist imagery can you identify in this statue? Bodhisattva of compassion. Well, Buddhist imagery includes a representation of 1,000 arms, female features, and the seated meditative pose. So how does this image differ from the classical Indian Buddha shown in source 4.2? Well, the number of hands is the most visible difference between the two statues. And moreover, the classical Indian statue in the source 4.2 engages with the viewer and welcomes him or her. In contrast, the depiction shown here is occupied in meditation and not engaged with the viewer. Here we go, the Chinese Maitreya Buddha. How does this Buddha image differ both physically and in its religious implications from the previous depictions of the Buddhas? Physically, this Buddha is plumper, has a more relaxed pose, and has a jovial rather than contemplative facial features. Regarding the religious implications, his features and the iconography that surrounds him tells us little about the historical Buddha or his teachings compared to the previous depictions. Now, while more approachable, he does not offer a believer the same spiritual help that a bodhisattva compassion does. And while he may have been modeled on a Chinese monk, the devotion around him identifies him as a Buddha who will appear in the future, making him a very different subject of devotion from a teacher like the historical Buddha or the bodhisattvas who have already lived on earth. So why might this image be appealing to some Buddhists, and why might others object to it? Well, the Maitreya Buddha is an approachable and likable figure. He offers security for the Buddhist faith in the future. But some might argue that he undermines the central position of the historical Buddha in the faith, and he implies that at some point in the future, the teachings of the historical Buddha will disappear, and he was not part of the early Buddhist beliefs. And that concludes our study of the birth of Christianity with Buddhist comparisons. I'll see you guys next time.